Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. Today's video will be a continuation of the German Society Analysis series. Today we have a very interesting book written in 1892. This book is called Die Frau und der Sozialismus, meaning Women and Socialism. Women and Socialism. And this was written by August Bebel. You can see the name here, August Bebel. He was one of the founding members of the German SPD, which is the liberal social democrat party that currently exists in Germany today. As of making this video, the previous Chancellor Olaf Scholz was a part of this party. Now it is the CDU. They have a new chancellor, so the German Conservative Party is now in power as of making this video. But the SPD, August Bebel was one of the founding members of the SPD. He has, from this time period, he has a lot of books that talk about, the existence of socialism and what role it plays in society, the necessity that was the necessity for socialism at the time, and he has some really interesting works. I thought this would be an interesting one just because looking at particularly women during this time period would be a unique perspective to have, considering I want to try to look at many different sides of the coin here. Let's talk about the book. As you can see, it has a very beautiful cover. The Internationale Bibliothek Stuttgart Verlag von some guy, don't know. As you can see, it's a very beautiful cover with the gold letters and the black ornate design. It looks reminiscent on the side. Here you can see. Here you can lightly see Die Frau und der Sozialismus. Some design on the sides here, and that says Internationale Bibliothek 9. Not the German word nine, but the number 9. If we open the book, we must be careful because the binding is starting to come off in some places, and so we must be careful with this book. It's rather old. Here we can see the inside. This was a part of some library at some point. And here we have the full title page. Die Frau und der Sozialismus. Yes. You can see there's some writing at the top there. Die Frau und der Sozialismus, die Frau in der Vergangenheit, Gegenwart und Zukunft. Women in the past, present, and future. So this book looks at the conditions of women in the past, in the present as of this book being written, which is, of course, in 1892, and in the future. The chapter on the future is very short. It's basically what they expect going forward. If we continue here, all rights reserved. Right. And then forward to the ninth edition, forward to the 11th edition, introduction, women in the past, women in the present, many, many chapters, and then women in the future. And then it goes on to talk about die Internationalität, the international solidarity, with something that's very common with socialists and communists. So, the book has a typical old German script that was common at the time. I forget the name. I'll put the name here. Maybe that worked. But as you can see, big letter at the start, and then of course, there are not much pictures in this book, but August Bebel signs this first edition. Signs the foreword to this edition, and then he obviously goes on with his statements. Now, anybody familiar with socialist writing, they are very particular with the words that they use. They want to stir an emotion within the reader to kind of take up the socialist cause and recognize the issues that exist. I think a lot of the arguments that he makes in this book have merit. This book was written in 1892, and socialism was implemented very widespreadly, internationally, in the aftermath of the First World War and prelude to the Second World War. So a lot of the services that came out of that wave of socialism, I think we still benefit from today. And so I don't think this is a radical book at all, especially with this topic of women, and I'll discuss some of the things that he mentions. The book has some tables of data. For example, this one, which is comparing populations between continents. This one showing the amount of people married per 10,000 people. So it has a lot of statistics that help to, back up the claims that they make. But really, it is, dare I say, heavy reading. Not particularly because of the content, but a lot of times the word choice, and it doesn't seem to have much of a breakup between topics aside from women in the past, women in the present, women in the future. Now, particularly with women in the present, he does break it up into different sections. However, the ideas seem to kind of go this direction, come back this way, and regardless, he makes a lot of very good points, and I want to discuss those now. So before we even get to the introduction, I would like to discuss the foreword to the book. It starts off with a sentence. People say books have their own story, but more than most books does... More than most book... Kid outside. More than most books does this book have its own story. And he talks about the development of this book trying to get published, and how in the late 1870s there was a destructive wave that aimed to kind of repress and disallow the Social Democrats to gain any footing in the society. And so it took a while for this book to be published, and it was a kind of miracle success that it was. But the point of the book can be very well summed up in the second paragraph of the introduction. August Bebel states, in regards to the so-called women question, die Frauenfrage, the women question, he says, this question concerns the position that women should occupy in our social organism so that they can become full, equal, and productive members of human society, and can fully develop their strengths and abilities in all directions. From our point of view, this question coincides with the other question, which is what form and organization human society must take in order to see free humanity and physical and social health in society instead of oppression, exploitation, need, and misery in 100 different forms. The so-called women's question is therefore for us only one side of the general social question that currently fills all minds and sets all spirits in motion, and it can only find its final solution in this question. So Bebel really views the emancipation of women as the same fight of the emancipation of the worker, which is, of course, the central idea to socialism and, by further extent, communism. And so those two things are, if not related, in the same fight, so to speak. He later states that this is particularly important in Europe, where women are more than half of the population. And therefore, this problem of equal representation affects over half of the population, which is quite considerable. He further elaborates on the idea that the solution to the women question is, at the present moment of the book, impossible to find due to the political perception of the issue, which is, what is the issue? Which is not only that women should be legally equal to men in every way, but they should have the same economic freedom and later he discusses sexual freedom that men are able to have, and so therefore is the women question the same as the workers question, where women are treated as pawns in the bourgeois game, so to speak, for their own particular reasons, but that is not separate from workers who are also severely taken advantage of in order to either A, further the bourgeois gains, or B, simply maintain the social order. Right? Bebel states that some men and women, perhaps conditioned to think this way, feel content in keeping the status quo. They don't even consider women in the emancipation question, especially when it comes to the workers' emancipation. There are socialists, and maybe not socialists, but people who are involved in the fight for workers' rights and so on and so forth, that don't even consider women to be a part of that struggle or even worth consideration. And once again, Bebel believes that could be perhaps conditioned. Or there are women themselves who are content in their aspired role, simply saying, it has always been this way and it will always be this way, which, if somebody's content to think that way, it's their life, but people need to realize that they can strive for more, of course. That is the central question and central idea that the book covers, is the women's emancipation being of equal consideration as the workers' emancipation, but also analyzing particular topics that affect women more so than the average male worker, so to speak. So let's talk about some of those things, some of those topics that are particularly women's issues of the time, especially. Things such as marriage, sexual freedom, and prostitution, of which the book describes very much. So Bebel opens up the chapter on women in the present by giving an example from ancient history. He talks about Plato. Plato thanked the gods for 8 benefits. The first one being that he was born as a free man and not as a slave, but the second one that he was born as a man and not as a woman. Bebel discusses that every hindrance that man has, women have as well, and many life ambitions and goals and activities that men enjoy, women are forbidden to partake in. And so the women of 1892 are forbidden to achieve most things in life, and therefore their life satisfaction is pretty bad, so to speak. However, in the beginning of this chapter, Bebel wants to discuss a sexual satisfaction. And he begins by quoting many great philosophers and writers of German history and of international origin, all discussing how sexual intercourse is, next to the need to eat, the strongest need of humanity, and to repress that is like asking fire not to burn, water not to be wet, and man not to eat, not to drink, not to sleep. He quotes many other philosophers and writers, even the Buddha, by saying sexual intercourse is the great unifier, so to speak, and provides the arrow that pierces the soul of man, of humanity. And so, these passionate statements regarding sexual intercourse are then used as justification to show that women are unequally forbidden to partake in the need for sexual satisfaction that is present in all humans. Bebel discusses further how evidence can be shown that women are unequally affected by this through lots of data regarding insanity which, don't forget, this is 1892, and so mental health was typically just called insanity at the time. And he uses cases of insanity among single women, single men, married women, and married men to showcase that cases of insanity are higher among single women and or divorced women. And that's proof, and or rather evidence, that one of the causes is these women's lack of sexual satisfaction. From a modern standpoint, that sounds like a strange thing to say. But you must remember, the women at this time, and this is what Bebel goes on to discuss, they are only allowed to partake in sexual intercourse in a marriage. And he later discusses, which I'll discuss in a few minutes, how prostitution is only available to men, and it is viewed by the social order, by the bourgeois, by the Männerwelt, the world of men, as the right of man to partake in. And women are not allowed to partake in that, are not allowed to partake in sex outside of marriage, which is hypocritical because the church at the time claims that the passion of the flesh is something sinful. However, prostitution is seen as a necessary evil in the eyes of many politicians and men in power. And more on that later. Returning to the issue of marriage and the topic of satisfaction, women are not permitted to engage in sexual satisfaction. And moreover, they are not really permitted to engage in life satisfaction. Whereas a man, and this is stated in the book, whereas a man, in the event he is not permitted to have access to sexual satisfaction, can engage in a career and occupation that requires all of his intellectual and physical prowess to achieve success and therefore satisfaction. Women are not able to have access to that, generally speaking, at the time, of course. And so this lack of sexual satisfaction and life satisfaction regarding achievement, goals, success, is perhaps one of the causes that drives a disproportionate amount of women to insanity, so to speak. Which then brings us to the question, if women are only allowed to achieve sexual satisfaction through marriage and then are limited in their ability to achieve life satisfaction, how has our society, a society in which the demands of a normal life are constantly increasing, can this society fulfill the needs of humans and by extension women? Sounds a bit like today with the higher demands of society, which we'll come to. But to talk about marriage, Bebel discusses how the marriage of the time is a product of the bourgeois society. And what does that mean? That it shows that the monogamous marriage is based on the relation of property and is more or less a forced marriage, which brings with it numerous excesses and evils, and often only achieves its purpose imperfectly or not at all. As a social institution, it is widely unavailable at the time, and marriage that exists purely for its natural tendency is either rare or simply unavailable to most people. Bebel believes that marriage should be only based on the natural propensity of two people to engage in a partnership based on the cooperative goals that they share and the equal sexual satisfaction of both people involved. For this reason, he has two rules for a good marriage, so to speak. These rules stem from criticism of the bourgeois marriage system, which once again at the time, as we learned from our book with Bismarck, was very centered around the high society and the royalty is not the word I want to use, but the high class position that not many people held, but which influenced society in a disproportionate way. Sound familiar? And so these complaints that he has and these two rules are based off of this negative influence from the bourgeois society on the working class stemming out of the Industrial Revolution. The first one is all foreign interests should remain distant from the partnership and purpose of the romantic connection. The second rule is to have a degree of insight that curbs blind passion. His words. I will leave that up to interpretation. But he says that since most marriages are lacking one, if not both, of these conditions, today's marriage is far from fulfilling its purpose, true purpose in many ways, and therefore cannot be named holy or moral, as many would like to state it. A statement that I found funny in the book is, those involved are interested in making their marriage appear to the world different from what it really is. In this area in particular, there is a state of hypocrisy such as was not characteristic of any previous society to such an extent. He goes on to say, nor is the state, as the representative of this society, interested in carrying out merely tentative investigations, the results of which could put its own actions in a remarkable light. He goes on to talk about how the state is responsible for this kind of hypocrisy of semi-forced marriages. But only the statement about people making their marriages look, or rather people wanting their marriages to look better than it is, I think is maybe a unintentional prediction for the current state in which we live. Bebel goes on to discuss the kind of current predicament that marriage was in, to discuss how the material needs in a partnership, in a marriage, are equally as important as the natural and sexual needs of each partner. In addition, the material needs are important for the continuation of the family, future kids, so on and so forth. And that, in the current state of things at the time, Bebel states that a man's salary is simply not enough to support the household, and that women must also go into work. And unfortunately, those work options are restricted for women, meaning that the family suffers due to the lack of availability for the wife, for the woman. In addition, he makes a statement where if a family has a farm, they view the coming of a newborn cow or sheep animal as more profitable than a female child, because a female child in a working class family cannot be married off to provide the family with any sort of financial gain, and also cannot be a productive member of the workforce. And so she is just a liability, and that's obviously not a good thing. And the bourgeois society does not see this struggle of the working class family not having a high enough salary from the man, the woman being restricted from work, them maybe having kids, not being able to support them. And it's a difficult situation that I think is so crazy to read about from over 100 years ago. And a lot of people have very similar complaints nowadays. The bourgeois society views the woman's traditional role as a necessity, as something natural, but in reality, it is the outlier. Having a wife who only stays at home is, traditionally speaking, in working class families, an outlier, because these families, they can't support themselves and they need both parents to work. In addition to that, Bebel paints a very strong picture of the husband-father goes to his industry-style job very early in the morning, comes back very, very late, barely gets to see his kids. His wife, if she has a job, the mother, she's in her job also for long hours, but her having children reduces the efficacy of her as a worker, and so therefore the family struggles. All of these factors lead to the destruction of the traditional idea of marriage, something that many people see, even nowadays. And the traditional image of marriage is something that is only available to the upper class. And in that way, the women question lies in the same boat as the workers' question. Another way those two things are related is, how women are taken advantage in their industry jobs. They are seen as perhaps not as efficient as men, and therefore do not earn enough or do not earn the same as men. They are seen as not standing up for themselves, not being able to negotiate things, and so they just are simply paid less, given less hours, viewed as a lesser worker than men. And so that is just another way that the worker question and the woman question are similar, but also how women are getting the short end of the stick. And of course, all of this leads to, again, that the family cannot support itself, and that's a difficult situation to be in. Moving on from the marriage perspective, let's talk about prostitution, everybody's favorite industry. Bebel introduces this idea with the statement that if the traditional marriage is one side of the bourgeois coin, prostitution is the other side. And that's an interesting statement, but he basically states that the bourgeois social order views the existence of prostitution as a necessary evil, something that will exist until the end of time and will only be snuffed out when the earth is destroyed, and so on and so forth. And Bebel discusses how prostitution is viewed as a right for men. And even men in marriages, according to the bourgeois social order, are allowed to partake in this sort of activity, this sexual satisfaction, that if you are a married man, you can partake in this sort of sexual satisfaction if your marriage does not please you. If you are a single man, you can take in this sort of sexual satisfaction because you do not have a wife. However, if you are a married woman, you can only have sexual satisfaction through your husband, and if you are a single woman, then you must find a husband so that way you can have sexual satisfaction. In addition, women are driven to prostitution through the lack of economic opportunity given to them, and this is seen as a severe lack of judgment on the civil Christian social order. Bebel criticizes many police doctors, is the word that he uses in the book. I guess that's a profession, who have published statements regarding prostitution, most of which call it a necessary evil to protect women against unloyal men, which is some serious mental gymnastics to go through. But Bebel states that this represents the most egregious form of male ego, and he goes on to criticize this tendency to regulate or want to regulate prostitution in these countries. He gives an example that in France it is regulated, in Germany it was not regulated, but it's not legal but tolerated. And Bebel seems to be anti-prostitution in all forms. And he even goes on to say that the fact that the state has to protect men from these women through regulation and legalization methods shows that men is the weaker sex and needs protecting from the state, and so on and so forth. That women have always been the sinful sex, and Eve took the apple, and there's a lot of contextual things regarding Christianity and the social order and things like that. I wonder what Bebel would say today about things like OnlyFans or other types of sex workers. I wonder if he would view it as as women taking control of their economic situation through these means, or if he would view it still as catering to the male audience and basing your economic liberation simply on the sexual satisfaction of men. I'm curious to see what he would say. I do find his general attitude on all of this to be kind of surprising, given the current trend of socialists in the society of promoting sex work and things like this. It is interesting to make those comparisons. There is a chapter in the book called Women in the Future, and it's very short, and most of it can be summed up in the second paragraph of the chapter. It reads as follows. In the new society, women are completely socially and economically independent. They are no longer subject to any semblance of domination and exploitation. They now stand before men as free and equal individuals. They are completely in control of their own destinies. Her education is the same as that of a man, except where the difference in sex makes deviations and particular treatment unavoidable. She can develop all her physical and mental powers and abilities under natural conditions of life. She can choose for her activity those areas which correspond to her wishes, inclinations, and abilities. Here she is active under exactly the same conditions as a man. One minute she is a practical worker in some trade. The next hour she is a governess, teacher, nurse. A third of the day she practices some art or cultivates some science, and a fourth part she performs some administrative function. She enjoys studies, pleasures, and conversations with her peers, or with men, just as she pleases and the opportunity presents itself. In her choice of love she is just as free and unhindered as the man. She marries or is married and enters into a union out of consideration other than her own inclination. This union is a private contract without the intervention of any official, just as marriage was a private contract until the late Middle Ages. So that's the future that Bebel wants, and he generally in this last chapter speaks further about women having the right to satisfy themselves sexually however they would like, to satisfy their life goals and ambitions however they would deem fit, and it's very general but hopeful language in order to paint a picture of a brighter future. Right? One interesting note I'd like to talk about before we finish, which connects to our previous video, is a note on Bismarck's attitude after the 1848 revolution. Bebel states that 1848 was the birth year of the bourgeois as a political class. Not simply just the royalty that existed, but as a political class active in the parliament. Primarily professors, liberalized noblemen, writers, lawyers, and doctors of all faculties. So these high society people were the German ideologues that kind of took control of the political situation post 1848. He states that even Herr von Bismarck recognized the situation and used it in his own way to reconcile the interests of the bourgeoisie with those of the Prussian monarchy, which the bourgeoisie had never been hostile to because it feared revolution from the masses. Right? And so he criticizes Bismarck as using the bourgeoisie to further the political aims of the Prussian monarchy through their perhaps ideological similarities, and therefore hindering the development of the social movement of the time. I think this book is very interesting to read. Might it have some radical ideas in it? Perhaps. I really don't think they're that radical. And I think this socialist wave was something that was long coming at the time, of course. And we saw it happen in the early 1900s, pre and post World War I. And yeah, I think this book provides a lot of insight, especially into women at the time, and maybe a different a different perspective of the society, where in the previous book we had Bismarck's perspective, who was a nobleman and a member of high society, politician himself. Here we have some people fighting for the working class, kind of riding this wave of socialism that started in the 1850s and just swelled and swelled and swelled until, big revolutions in the early part of the 20th century. And so, if you have any questions about the book, please ask. I forgot to mention that in my last videos, but I really would enjoy any questions. Just ask me in the comments. Feel free to subscribe if you like the content. I will continue to do more. Our next book will be actually a cartoon, political cartoon, social cartoon book from Munich from 1897, I believe. And so it'll be very quick. We'll just look at some of the humor, if you can call it that. Some of it's funny, but a lot of, ironically or coincidentally, a lot of it's about women, so this will go well with this book. I'm looking forward to doing that soon, and so if you have any questions, please ask me. I would be more than happy to make a follow-up video and things like that. So I recommend this book if you would like to read more about late 19th century socialism, and yeah, I'll see you in the next video. Thank you for watching.